Welcome to the Book Show, a celebration of reading and writers. I'm Joe Donahue. Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus is the #1 New York Times bestselling novel featuring Elizabeth Zott, a headstrong, gifted chemist in 1960s California whose career takes a detour when she becomes the unlikely star of a beloved TV cooking show. Elizabeth isn't just teaching women to cook, she's daring them to change the status quo. Since publishing Lessons in Chemistry, it has taken the world by storm. Named Barnes & Noble Book of the Year in 2022, the New York Times, the Washington Post, NPR, Oprah, Entertainment Weekly, and many others have all listed it as a best book of the year. Still dominating the bestseller lists, Lessons in Chemistry is soon to be an Apple Plus series starring and produced by Brie Larson. It's an absolute delight to welcome Bonnie Garmus to this week's book show. Congratulations on the great success.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for having me on your show.
No matter how many times I hear your story, I feel so good for you. I just, it seems...
I appreciate that.
It just seems wonderful. So give us a sense of how... In the course of your life, you decided that this was something you wanted to do and write a novel.
Well, I have been writing for a long time. I'm a copywriter and a creative director. And I did actually write my first novel when I was 5 years old. And I think it's really good. It's a page long and it starts with once upon a time. And then there's a sentence I don't like to talk about in the middle. And then it just says the end. And I illustrated it.
There you go.
That one has, it's never been picked up, but it's still there waiting. And I wrote another when I was 12. So I've always kind of wanted to be a novelist. That one went in the school library and no one ever checked it out in 2.5 years. And then I started another novel and I never finished that one because it just wasn't working. Then I wrote another novel that never got picked up. It got 98 rejections. And then I wrote Lessons in Chemistry. So it's a long time down this road, but I'm glad I persevered. It was worth it.
So what do you think it was about this novel, about this idea, about this creation that finally caught fire?
Well, I think from what I've heard from readers is that in our world today, we're faced with so much irrationality. And Elizabeth Zott is a very rational character. She's also a very strong feminist character. She just refuses to accept the position that she's in because it doesn't make sense to her. She's a scientist. She exists by evidence, and she believes in that. And so when she finds that women are treated differently simply because of their gender, that makes absolutely no sense to her, and she refuses to accept it.
There is a wonderful rigidity to the character that may be off-putting for many, but as a character is really fascinating and quite lovely.
Yeah, it's funny because some people will call her rigid and others will call her just the opposite. Oh, she's so flexible. And I think, well, I wouldn't call her flexible. She's very, very determined. And, I think that her view on life is one that I'm really interested in. She's a humanist. She's a rationalist. She's a scientist. She just doesn't take things at face value. And, she faces a lot of tragedy in her life, a lot of difficulty. And yet, like all of us, she has to find a way to get through that and move on. And it's how she handles those problems that I was really interested in, pursuing.
At what point did you know that the novel would go in the direction that it went in the sense of how Elizabeth would take the circuitous route to becoming known?
That idea came to me. I knew that she had a lot to say, and I needed to give her a place to say at a pulpit. And to me, it seemed logical to put her on television in the early 1960s and have her talking to the housewives at home, who are always called average housewives, have her talking to them and delivering a message to these women who were starved of hearing anything like capability and restoring their capability, their self-esteem, their self-worth, but also do it with some humor and, just basically have this message of, look, whoever told you you're average was wrong. Now let's get started and let's live a real life.
When you came up with this character, I assume you always knew that you wanted to put this book in the 50s and 60s.
Well, to tell you the truth, I actually put it back in that time period because I had suffered some sexism at work one day, and it was so irritating that particular day. That day, I felt like I needed some sort of reassurance that we'd move forward as women in the world. Because that day I wasn't sure at all that anything had changed since the 60s. So I actually said it then, A, because that's when my mom was a mom and I'd never had a chance to really think about what she'd given up. But B, because I needed to do some research to make sure things had changed a little, and they have. It's just that they haven't changed nearly enough for women.
The fascinating aspect of this character is that she's a genius. She really knows her stuff. And yet nobody really will take that for absolute 100% proof. That they will still attribute it to somebody else. She's part of a team. Someone else. She was working with somebody else. You feel the frustration in the character, but also great determination as to, okay, that I'm not going to be labeled that way.
Yeah, exactly right. She does just simply refuse to accept the status quo, and she fights back. She is, very articulate. She's very well spoken. She has a lot to say, but she doesn't mince words. She's not really mean. She just says no, and then she does what she thinks is right. And it was really fun to write a character like that, believe me.
I would imagine. Bonnie Garmus is the author of Lessons in Chemistry, the #1 New York Times bestseller. I assume when you start something like this, that this is what publishing dreams are made of, which is what makes this story so lovely, that the book comes out almost a year ago and is now more popular than the day it was released. That must be intensely gratifying.
It really is. This entire experience has been completely unpredictable. I never thought anything like this would happen. I didn't think the book would get published, to be honest. And so for all of this to happen and to keep unwinding and keep moving forward, the book is really popular in a lot of different countries. It's been translated into 40 languages. It's just amazing to be able to connect with people all over the world and hear their stories and have them tell me why this book has meant so much to them.
When you hear that, what is it that often is the spark that speaks to them and is the reason it means so much?
I think most people feel at one point in their lives, or maybe several points in their lives, that they need to make a dramatic change, whether it's at work or in their family relationship, in their marriage, whatever it is, something isn't going right. And it's very hard to face those things. Elizabeth Zott in the book has to face many, many things that are difficult. And these things that are things that happen every single day in the world to millions of people all the time. And I think that's why she resonates, because she's facing what they're facing. And she goes about changing her life in a very specific, straightforward way. She doesn't overcomplicate it. She doesn't exaggerate it. She just acts. And that, I think, is really appealing to a lot of readers. So when I do hear from readers, they're mostly telling me how they're changing, what they're doing, and hearing what they're doing has been absolutely gratifying.
The thing I really enjoyed about it is the reality, I think, and the fact that not all men are evil in the book. Not all of them are misogynists, and not all of the women are great cheerleaders or helping this character Elizabeth to empowering her to do better in her life. There is a real showcasing of different people and the views of that time and of this time. We're still going through it, obviously. There are these different types and how Elizabeth deals with all of them.
Oh, yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up, because a lot of people will hear feminist and think it's anti-men. No, this book is anti-sexism. I know a lot of men who I consider my allies. They're feminists, or whether they identify that as a feminist or not, they support women. They don't put them down. They don't treat them badly. They treat them as equals. And I wanted to really make sure that came out in the book, because that's reality. Not all men are misogynists. But there is a problem with, I think, a lot of us standing up to a misogynist. And that goes for men too. And so what I hear from male readers is that they'll identify with certain male characters in the book, what I call the male allies. And they'll say, I wish I'd spoken up in that meeting. Or, I wish that I hadn't behaved in this way or that way. I wish I had supported my colleague in a different way. I'm glad that things are changing. And so it's really been gratifying for me to hear from men. And I do have a lot of male readers all of a sudden.
First of all, it's a wonderfully written book, and it's endlessly entertaining. So you should have readers of all stripes. But I do think that this idea of encountering different people, different challenges, is very interesting first and foremost, but also very realistic. That you eschew the labels that often come with a subject like this.
Oh, thank you. It was important for me to write it as it is. I know that the themes are very dark within the book, but there's also a lot of lightness in the book. And that's partly I didn't want to be didactic and sound too preachy or like I was teaching or anything like that. But what I really wanted to get across was that, we can't exist without each other. We all work together. We go faster. We go further. And that's certainly why rowing is part of the book. I'm a rower, but rowing to me represents a certain balance. Chemistry is the science of balance. Rowing is the sport of balance. The book is balance between dark and light. One of the biggest lessons in the book is that if we really don't work together, we will never progress. We could be so much further by now if we would set aside these ridiculous old beliefs that spawn things like sexism and racism. They're unnecessary, they're unscientific, and they don't belong in a world that is, by the way, ruled by the laws of chemistry.
The chemistry angle, if you will, is interesting because given your background, I thought as I was reading it, I was like, oh, well, Bonnie must be really into chemistry, and maybe this is it. and then as you said at the beginning, and as I knew, you're a copywriter and a creative director. So what was it about science, and especially a science like chemistry, that lent itself so well to Elizabeth's story?
Well, I think that scientists try to be a little bit more sensible. I'm not saying that all of them are, but I think, science itself uses the scientific method to explore ideas and test hypotheses in order to make progress. It's because of science and the way they conduct the business that we have cures and vaccines, and we move ahead on some fronts. To me, it was important to make her a scientist because women have been routinely held back from science. And the idea of holding anyone back based on gender, race, religion, anything is ludicrous in that particular category of science, because science itself does not recognize differences between people like that.
When women understand chemistry, Elizabeth explains to a reporter, they understand how things work. Science offers the real rules that govern the physical world. When women understand these basic concepts, they can begin to see the false limits that have been created for them. That is something that is a sell initially for Elizabeth, who obviously is a chemist whose job opportunities are taken away, and then is offered this show, which nobody thinks is going to be anything other than a typical cooking show of the 1950s and 60s.
Yeah, it was fun to write that show, honestly, to have her just simply say, well, I'm not going to be doing that after she's been hired, because obviously when any of us get hired for a job, we realize what's expected of us and we pretty much do it. She decides not to do that because she knows it's wrong. It doesn't help the women at home. They don't need to learn how to make dinner. They need to get back their self-esteem. They need to live their lives. And they need to raise children who understand that their mother is just as an important member of the family as the father is, which is why there's that line at the end of her show where she says, "Children, set the table. Your mother needs a moment to herself." Elizabeth Zott assumes that children will watch that show, and they do, because she's so you can't not watch her. She's kind of like a train wreck sometimes. But by using that line, she's actually educating the next generation that their mother is someone to be respected and admired. That was her kind of plug to change the next generation.
Let us talk about the relationship that Elizabeth has with Calvin Evans, a Nobel-nominated chemist and someone that she works with at Hastings Research Institute. He is a star. He is someone that everyone looks to. They often like him grudgingly and are jealous of him. And yet, what is it about these two characters, do you think, or how you made them click to make that so realistic that they would eventually bond?
Well, I'm glad you used the word bond, because that's exactly what it is. So I created these two characters. I wanted to have a man as smart as Calvin Evans, to be misunderstood, by the way. Everyone looks at him and they think he has it all.
Right.
He looks as if he's had a great education, and he has. He's gone to Cambridge, but we learn how he got there and what his real circumstances were. You know, he came from poverty. By the same token, they misjudge Elizabeth Zott. They think that she's simply beautiful. There's nothing behind that beauty, and that she's had it made because she can get anything she wants looking the way she does. Neither of these things are true. We as people always judge people by how they look, and we tell ourselves stories about what they must be like. But Calvin and Elizabeth are both very lonely people. And when they discover each other, the thing that I loved about Calvin, and I loved writing it, was that he is not intimidated by her intellect. He embraces it. He doesn't try to bury it. He tries to actually amplify it and help her, because he sees that she's just as smart as he is. And for him, what a relief. He finally has someone to talk to.
Are you ready for the dog question?
I am. Oh, boy.
So, I mean, one of the things that is so delightful about the book, for a book that is obviously mired in science, there is a dog who's very much a character, 630. And it is a dog who thinks, who has a very close relationship with Elizabeth, in the sense that Elizabeth teaches the dog a great deal. The dog teaches Elizabeth a great deal. And this is your smarter than your average dog. Literarily speaking, I think anyone who has a dog probably feels this way about their animal. But to see that come alive in a book in such a serious way was, I thought, just very charming.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's kind of interesting, because when I started writing 630 and he started having thoughts on the page, I was worried about it. I didn't want to put magical realism in the book, but truthfully, the more I thought about it, and 630 is the only character in the book based on a real live being. 630 was based on our dog Friday, who passed away a while ago. But it just occurred to me, well, of course animals think. Of course they think all the time. They make decisions all day. And so for us not to give them a voice, why not? I mean, I'm going to do it. And so I wanted 630 in there to comment on his side of the animal kingdom, to actually have that voice, that thought process of, why do these people make such poor decisions all the time? And I really enjoyed writing him. I think of him as the anthropologist of the book, as the wise one in the book. And I think often that animals do have that superiority to us. I mean, a dog can smell and hear far better than we can. If we had those senses as amplified as a dog does, we'd be superhero material. But we live with these animals every day on the planet, and we kind of shrug it off like, oh, so that's what they can do. Well, they can do an awful lot. So for us to keep defining intelligence by human standards makes no sense to me, and it would certainly make no sense to 630.
I just have to wonder, what somewhere through the editing process did someone say to you, "Oh, Bonnie"?
Oh yeah. Oh, there were a couple of those. Oh, Bonnie, no, no, no.
Did you have to fight for it?
I did. I did have to fight for it. I have a great agent, and I really admire my agent for, calling my attention to things that she thought could be problematic. She doesn't hold back, and that's what you want in an agent. I don't hold back either. The two of us together, I think, are such a great combination because we can speak so honestly and freely, like, this is a really dumb idea, or I'm not going to do this, or whatever. I love that. I love getting feedback on things, but it doesn't mean I have to agree.
Right.
And she doesn't have to agree with me. And that's why we work so well together, because we're willing to listen to the other person's ideas and then act on them or not act on them. But we always listen. So, yeah, she wasn't thrilled about the dog at first, but I know that she came around to that. And I think 630, has become this kind of cult fan favorite. It's really interesting to see. It is kind of funny. It is also funny that finally one of my editors revealed to me that I was working with all cat people.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And I went, you guys should have told me that. I didn't learn that till the very end.
I think the publishing industry has a lot of cat people in it. But so Friday passed on. Do you have it says in the about the author section that you have a dog now, 99.
99, yeah.
What kind of dog is 99?
99 is a Greyhound rescue. She was a racer, and she is named after the Get Smart characters from the 1960s.
That was my next question to you. Does this have a Barbara Feldon connection?
Exactly. That is who 99 is.
That's such a great name for a dog, especially a Greyhound. And do you think of 99 as having some of the abilities that 630 has?
Some of them definitely. I think that she's quite smart. But I would say that our dog Friday she would have, if she had taken dog SATs, she would have gotten a perfect score. She was so smart, and she learned so many words that we did not teach her. She would simply watch our mouths move, and she started to connect words with objects. And she would bring us objects all the time to let us know that she knew what we were talking about. We were transferred abroad to Switzerland, and Friday learned German. So this was no average dog.
No.
No, she was not average at all. But she'd come from a very terrible background. She'd been badly abused, and so badly abused that her owner was put in jail for it. So for her to come back like this and still have love for the human race, for me, that was 630.
Bonnie Garmus is our guest in this week's book show. The name of the book is Lessons in Chemistry. I want to talk about Madeline, who is Elizabeth's daughter, and the relationship and what that character brings to Elizabeth, because even having this daughter who is always trying to find out the truth, which is often difficult for her to find, Elizabeth seems at some points to have it all, and yet is also a profoundly sad character.
Yes, exactly. I think she is a really sad character, which is funny in a book that has a lot of humor.
Yes.
But I think, in terms of Mad, I wanted to create a child that was raised without limits, raised by a mother who refused to give in to society's rules, who would let her child explore and do things. And I wanted to find out how this would affect the child. And in fact, Mad is a little bit of a sad sack a lot of times. She questions everything. She reads broadly, but she gets her wisdom, I think, from 630. They have a very special relationship. 630 has been talking to her since she was in the womb. I just wondered, how would a child turn out if they're raised by a mother who believes there are no limits at all for girls in the early 1960s, that her daughter can read and do whatever she wants. And yet she has the input of a dog and a neighbor who is older and has had exactly the opposite experience from Elizabeth Zott, who is not well educated, who's never worked outside of the home. And so I wanted Mad to reflect a little bit of everyone, but still be her own person and still wonder about, well, what happened to my dad?
It reminded me, as I was reading about the character and as the character develops, the Natalie Wood character, Susan Walker, in Miracle on 34th Street.
I love that. You know what? I hadn't seen that before, but I'm so glad you said that. That's a compliment. I really love that character.
Because it's a mother who wants their child to know the truth, doesn't want them to believe in fairy tales and dreams, to have a very realistic view of the world, and yet realizes that isn't perhaps the best way to go about it. Were you always in the sense of how the book ended and how you brought everything together, that was that always where you were headed, do you think?
You know, when I wrote the first chapter of Lessons in Chemistry, I also happened to write the last 3 lines of the book. It's like I needed a target to aim for, and oddly, those 3 sentences remain, which I didn't think would happen. Yeah, the ending, I really struggled with the ending. I probably rewrote it 15 times. I could probably rewrite it again. But I think what I was aiming for was, sometimes people would say, well, I wish it had been a little happier. And other people would say, I thought it was really happy. It's really interesting to see how many people see it a very different way. But in the end, what I wanted more than anything was to have Elizabeth Zott standing on her own. She'd gone through a lot and she's still standing. And she's not with somebody, she's standing on her own. And that to me was the most important message.
It is delightful to see really cool, nice people get ahead and
Thank you, Joe.
and do so well and create something. Most importantly, create something that is important, that is intelligent, and is just seems to make the world a better place. Bonnie Garmus, an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Joe.
Again, Bonnie Garmus's new novel is Lessons in Chemistry. It's published by Doubleday. Thanks to producer Sarah LeDuc. Our executive producer is Dr. Alan Chartok. The latest on National Productions programs is available via the Airwaves newsletter at WAMC.org and on social media at WAMC Radio. Bookmark us for